Okay, is that screen up now, Mushtaq?
That's good.
Okay, good. Just minimize some of the things. Okay, so as Mushtaq said, we're going to talk a little bit about value studies, and I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions on how you might be able to better enhance your team productivity and get the best out of it for whoever you're performing that value study for. So today we're going to talk about 5 things. I'm going to just bore you to death going way back when and how I got into value management, some challenges, talk about the goals of what I see we need to look at for updating the way we deliver workshops, give you some approaches to consider, and finally summarize that off. So first off, and unfortunately now that I've got the full screen here, I can't actually see people, but do we have any value team leaders here? And I would say just turn your mics on and just shout out if you are, and if you're not, that's okay too. Anybody here that would consider themselves as a value team leader? Doesn't sound like it. Okay, well, Mushtaq, I know you are, so. Anyways, okay.
Phillips.
Sorry?
Martin Phillips is here.
Oh, Martin. Well, he's a team leader.
Gary is here, and, as well as, I think, Steve Holmes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, that's good. I apologize that I can't actually see who's here, but that's okay. So this is really more geared to value team leaders than it is for participants, but it's really to the benefit of the participants as well. So it's difficult to say, but or see you, but what are some of those challenges that you have faced as a team leader? And we're only going to run this for about 30 seconds. So Mushtaq, start it off.
Some disconnect between different team members in terms of how we proceed, especially during creativity or evaluation phase, because information phase, people try to just jump on with ideas. That kind of, I guess, something I've faced.
Yep, okay. Mr. Steve Holmes and then Mr. Phillips.
Well, Mr. No shows up at some workshops and is negative from the start.
Yeah. Anything else, Steve?
Same thing as for Mushtaq. They want to get going. They don't want the impatience of they don't want to get briefed on questions. They want to tell you what their solutions are. Yep. And also, I guess the other one is subject matter experts who think they are the only ones with good ideas and don't want to listen to other stakeholders. Gotcha.
Okay. And Martin, we won't make this an exhaustive thing, but I know the 3 of you. So Martin, can you just share with us any kind of a challenge that you've faced over the years as a team leader?
Well, did I hear my name? I'm sorry, I was missing.
You did. I just asked you
I wasn't in action.
Look, if you've had any sort of challenges that you faced as the value team leader over the years.
Well, quite honestly, my biggest problem is procurement.
Okay.
My biggest problem is procurement systems, trying to get through them.
Okay.
It's not. It doesn't quite answer your question, but that is a huge problem for me.
Yeah, but I may have something in this presentation that might help out there too. So let's just see. Okay. Well, let's. We've gone around the room a little bit, and I realize that it's difficult when we can't see each other when we've got the screen going full tilt. But let's get into.
Sorry, this is Rakesh. Can I make one comment?
Yes. I'm sorry, Rakesh.
No, thank you. Thank you, Mushtaq, for organizing. One comment and one add to your question, David. So first of all, one comment would be the organizer and Mushtaq. I'm on vacation, and I heard that someone legend coming from Value Engineering Save International, so I couldn't miss it. So I'm joining with that expectation. And the second, to add to your question, David, I'm not a CVS, I'm a VMA, but I have, in my role in government agency, I support a VM team leader to lead this study and bringing that best outcome. And one of the things I'm looking for and challenge I face as a co-leader sometimes from the agency, dealing with a different personality, especially sometimes decision makers and executives who have no idea the low maturity of value engineering. So I'm looking forward to learning from you. Thank you.
Okay, might have something for you on that one too. Okay, well, let's move on. So quickly, my journey, I got into value engineering in 1995. We were chasing a proposal for the Ministry of Transportation. My boss came in and said, hey, we're going to do this bid on this value engineering study. And I asked him, well, what was that? And he said, well, this is where we do the engineering right. And I'm looking at my engineering ring and thinking, I thought we already were supposed to do that. But anyways, I started, I guess, about a 2-year odyssey. It was really self-learning at that point. I was involved with, some of you may know Steve Taylor. We were in a consortium together, and the two of us were kind of coming along, sort of working off of each other. And in 1997, I had my Mod 1. Now I think it's more referenced as value management fundamentals, but at the time it was Mod 1 study, our course in 1998. And then by 2000, I got into being a certified value specialist. And along the way, I became aware that even though I had a lot of facilitation skills, that being a professional facilitator would probably help me out as well. So about 2008, I became a certified professional facilitator. And a lot of the things that you're going to hear today are really sort of a blend of those two certification specialties of the value management and of the facilitator role. And so, as much as I'm the director of education right now with SAVE, I don't necessarily always subscribe to the terminology that they use. So if you're looking at the VM guide, they call all the team leaders now facilitators, and I won't get into that one. That's a whole other presentation, but let's keep going. So my early experiences and observations came in the form of really just 5-day workshops just seem to be typical. And why is that? Well, the value methodology was born out of the manufacturing industry in the 40s, and I'm sure most of you know some of the history of that. But they created, essentially a team or a posse of people that worked on some issue for a week, then switched and went on for another issue for a week. And that, unfortunately, that 5-day mindset for a workshop is still pretty prevalent in a lot of locations, a lot of jurisdictions, and a lot of agencies. And unfortunately, sometimes you need more and sometimes you need less. Another thing I found was that the teams were provided with way too much background information for the job at hand. The overview presentations tended to be too long. I've been in ones that have gone 4 and 5 hours. Oh my gosh, like it's just crazy. The function analysis segment, which typically the team leader would be responsible for, was just an overload. I've seen team leaders spend oodles and oodles of time analysis and don't really get a lot of benefit out of that. But that was another observation I made. Very long creativity sessions. The processes for evaluating were very cumbersome and didn't move you along very well. And what's the result of that? Well, you have limited development time. And from my perspective, the development time of the idea is probably one of the most critical steps of all of the things that we do in a workshop. because if you don't flush the idea out to a point that it is understandable, it's, you know, succinctly packaged, and you have a good handle on what the impacts are in terms of, you know, scheduling and resources and things, it's really, really hard to get somebody to pick that idea up. And so all of these things that are sort of to the left-hand side of the screen really just wind up sort of clogging the system up. So this presentation is a lot about sort of achieving, dealing with these things. So my early expectations of what the team leader would be, you know, part project manager, part task manager, or master, sorry, and part facilitator. And that's why I guess I object to the term facilitator as in our SAVE guide. But you think about all the things that a team leader has to do. They have to deal with the financial side. They have to deal with the scheduling of the work. They have to, you know, be motivating and moving people along through this process. And they also have to be able to draw things out from people that may be reluctant to do that. So those are all there. I guess if I was to sort of pin a spot where I land, you know, through this whole wide variety of personnel, and again, this industry is probably the wildest in terms of personalities that I've ever seen. Like, you know, if you go and you talk to a structural engineer about a bridge, and then you go to talk to a second structural engineer about a bridge, you're going to find that, you know, they're pretty much the same, you know, different skill set, or sorry, different experiences maybe, but, you know, they pretty much do exactly the same way, whether they're working for here or working for here or whatever. In the value industry, it's really driven by a lot of personality styles too. So, but I sort of found that I tended to be maybe less focused on project management, leaning a bit more to facilitation, and maybe that's my other skill set that I talked about, and when necessary, rolling over to the task manager. I hope you can see the mouse moving around here. So the challenges that I observed basically are that teams sometimes show up poorly prepared. The team leaders quite often are focused more on the process than what we get out of the value study. They allow early activities like the information phase and function analysis phase and even creativity to take way longer than you had scheduled. And all of those different sort of slips put more and more pressure on the amount of time that you have to develop those ideas. And if you go back to what I said at the beginning, where I feel that the development time is one of the most critical elements of the workshop process, you'll understand why I'm doing this presentation, to try and give you some different ideas on how to sort of manage that. The bottom line is all of those things wind up frustrating your team. And if your team is frustrated, they're not going to perform to the abilities that they can and what you expect. And if the team doesn't perform well, then the team leader has a really hard time performing well in terms of delivering a quality service. Okay, and everything's about service now. Okay, so the goals. We're going to do it the way we always do it. No way. No way. Actually, I included this picture here just to give you an idea. This is from a workshop that I did in Colombia on I think it was like about a 20-kilometer LRT program. And these are a small group of people working on just looking at some plans, you know, trying to come up with ideas. But just to give you an idea, this was a workshop with 80 people in it that primarily spoke Spanish, me, who sometimes can barely speak English, and I had a full-time English to Spanish translator. Everybody had headsets, or not at this point because they were just looking at things, but everybody had a headset. So when I talked in English, it came out in Spanish. When they talked in Spanish, it came out in English. And we worked it that way. That was just, and the reason I include that picture was just to remind me to mention that there are all sorts of different ways to deliver your workshops, but the focus of this presentation is really to look for ways to enhance team performance, and in doing so, create more development time. What's the output of that? I think it's better developed value opportunities. Okay, so going to give you 8 things. I promised you 8 things. So rethinking the workshop, prepping the team function subject matter specialist, rethinking thinking, efficient choices, planning your development, rock the talk, and the secret. Okay, those are all sort of cryptic titles, and they're meant to be. But you may interpret where we're going with this. Okay, so rethinking the workshop. In the last 4 years, we have seen a dramatic change in how workshops can be delivered. Up until the pandemic, it was primarily in-person workshops. You had to deal a lot with mobilization issues, try to get people there. If you needed a site visit, you had to get them to the site. But the pandemic unlocked a different way of doing things, and that was through virtual experience. And I must admit that in my own experiences, I've actually found the virtual workshop experience, albeit I miss some of the sidebar kind of comments and things that you tend to do and just the camaraderie, it is more efficient than in an in-person interview or in-person workshop. Then there's the sort of the hybrid where you have an in-person, a group of people that are working in person, and you have others that are connected in hybrid, on virtual, and that has its own challenges as well. But that's one of the first things that you really have to think about. So some considerations that you're going to talk about, I've mentioned mobilization issues. There's costs associated with that. There's timing associated with it. One of the really big things that I've found with a lot of government agencies is that there's an interest by senior staff to attend these workshops. Now, they don't typically attend for very long, like they'll pop in, pop out and things. But if they're planning to attend, sometimes it's a real challenge because they're expecting that you're going to work around their time availability, and it's difficult, to sometimes get your subject matter experts to sort of work around that. I have one coming up in the next little while, which was just a real challenge in being able to find a sweet spot of where people could be. The venue, I have had situations where everything's all set to go, and then we can't find a venue. So that might force you towards a virtual thing, or if you have a client owner preference or something like that. I had one contractor wanted me to go to Halifax for one-day meeting. It was a sort of a think tank session. And I said, well, we're kind of just coming out of the pandemic. Nope, want to do it in person, giddy up. And so in that way, you also have to recognize that the clients have preferences as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the sequencing of projects and, elements in the workshop. So in the workshop, we would typically have an information phase, a function analysis, creativity, and evaluation, development, and presentation phase. That's kind of our block diagram, right? And typically all of the presentations are in the workshop. Well, one way to get a little bit more development time is to actually consider pulling those presentations outside the workshop. Remember I was talking about, sometimes information sessions or information project overview presentations can get really long. Well, if you pull it out of the workshop, you have a greater control over your time when you're together physically or virtually. So having a workshop overview presentation out in front does sort of two things. Number one, it disentangles that potentially very cumbersome thing. Now, design teams want to tell you absolutely everything, whether you want to hear it or not. And it also starts to prepare your team, because your team is going to be looking at the background information at this point, and having it sort of buttressed with the overview presentation means that they are learning and hearing at the same time. Whereas if we give them project information up front, they spend a little bit of time getting ready for the workshop, then they show up there, then they hear a presentation, and they may hear things that they didn't interpret properly, and now you're in this sort of circle of clarification questions and things to try and sort out. Having an information overview presentation outside of the workshop, sort of just about the same time that you hand over the information, gives them a chance to understand. It's almost like the audio book of all of the material that you're giving, okay? The second presentation that you can pull out is to pull out the preliminary results presentation at the end. In workshops, there's an awful lot of pressure to get to that presentation stage. And it's on the last day of your workshop, you're screaming to try and get everything, you know, as tight as you can before you present. And the challenge with that, of course, is that there simply isn't a lot of time. So that puts the additional squeeze on your development, because all of these have kind of encroached and this is kind of squeezed down. And so you're not really prepared. So stepping it outside is a really good tool. So you'll say, well, if you're pulling the information presentation out and you're pulling this out, why do we have information phase and presentation phases in there? Well, because you're going to have the project team give like a 10-minute recap of their presentation, and that serves as a forum to ask clarification questions and get some things understood. You're also going to understand what the goals, constraints, commitments are of the product or project or process that you're looking at. So you need some information phase time in here. And for this one, your team has been working on their ideas for quite some time. And so this is a point where you get to sort of road test some of those ideas and just throw them up in a sort of I guess a round robin discussion, or even a somewhat of a preliminary pre-presentation, you know, so that you've got a chance to kind of understand. And sometimes you'll hear me talking about you working concurrently in different groups and things. And so this is a chance for everybody to kind of come back together again. So you can gain a little bit of development time by popping those out. So that's sort of, you know, one of the ideas for rethinking the workshop. Okay, prepping the team. Well, one of the observations that I had made is that you can give your team a lot of information, and unfortunately, they are going to look at whatever they're going to look like if they look at it at all sometimes. You just don't have a way of testing that. So here's a way to test it. So as you distribute the background information and the team starts to look at issues and things and starts to review the background documents, ask them partway through to give you a list of what their preliminary concerns or issues are. It's almost like checking homework. And every time I've done this, the team has hit the workshop much more prepared than if I let them just go here and then pop into the workshop, which has sort of been the traditional approach. So you test them. How do you test them? Well, first off, you put a deliverable. It doesn't have to be very formal. Sometimes we do just have a check-in meeting, and we'll do a Zoom meeting or whatever, and we'll talk about, what's this, and what's your concern here, and it does two things. Number one, it forces them to look at the information and be ready, and they've still got time to look at additional information. But also too, it allows them to share their preliminary concerns with the other team members. And in doing so, the other team members may start to think or become aware of other issues and things that kind of overlap or link together from their perspective. Because remember, subject matter experts, they tend to be more tunnel focused on their specific aspects, but by the time you get there, you want them to be thinking about it. So typically, quite often, I'll say, let's have a meeting, or send me a list of issues, or prepare some slides, and sometimes we'll actually prepare a slideshow to go in to a value meeting, a value workshop, and say, hey, by the way, while we were looking at this, these are the kinds of issues that we see are concerned. You're not at this point providing any ideas. You're just saying, hey, these are the areas of concern. Why is that important? Because it's like a kickstart to start in creativity. Because what are the first ideas you're going to think about? You're going to think about the ideas to solve the concern that you were thinking about back in the warm-up phase. Okay, so that's another one. You don't really get much advance in terms of development time with this, but this is really one of preparing the team to be their best during the workshop. Okay. Now, function subject matter expert. This will be controversial. If you are going to write your CVS exam, please ignore everything I'm going to say. But this is the real world I'm going to tell you about. When I was taught function analysis during my Mod 1, Mod 2 days, and even ad nauseum since that, and I've read it here and heard people talk about there, I've always been told that it helps the team to understand the project. So working on functions helps the team to understand the project. And it's a team building exercise. I can tell you, I'm doing many function analysis sessions, that the team typically already understands the project pretty well. They think function analysis is a waste of time, and this goes back to, I think, Mushak and Steve's comments about they just want to get going. It's a major source of frustration because it's just taking way too long, and it gets in the way of what they really want to do, which is to kick out ideas. Okay, so that right there is probably the genesis of this whole thought process of development and trying to increase in development time. And I had a team member one time that said, you know, you're always, as a team leader, all you guys, sort of, you know, putting us all in the same basket, all of you team leaders, you want to make it all about how important function analysis is. And I thought about that for a moment, and it goes, and when you do that, it takes away the time for us to do the rest of our work. And I thought about that for a while, and there's a chap that he's passed away now, but a chap by the name of Charles, by the way, and he's the guy that came up with the FAST diagram, function analysis system technique, of which this is sort of a clip. And I used to sponsor him to come to the SAVE conferences, and he said to me, Dave, he says, you only need to do function analysis until you get to a point that you can generate ideas. And that was a real mind changer for me, because I had always wanted, you know, my FAST diagram to start on the left side and go right across to the right side. And I worked at one time, I can tell you, this was back in a project office out in New Brunswick. We were working on a toll road project, and I did a FAST diagram that was on a 30-foot long chalkboard, because that's all they had. And I was so enamored by what I produced, but it didn't help. It didn't, like, we didn't need all those functions just to figure out what the project was about and to get us thinking ideas. So what I'm going to suggest is that we hire all of these other, or bring in all of these other subject matter experts, like the architect and the constructability person and the environmental planner and the mechanical engineer and the systems engineer and so on and so forth. We bring them all in because they have an expertise. Well, if you just hold the mirror up, you as a team leader also has an expertise. You are the expert in function analysis. Nobody else is. You are the expert in function analysis. So use your skill as a subject matter expert to help the team move forward, okay? So one of the ways to deal with that is to do some pre-work on the functions and come up with as many functions before the meeting as possible. You don't have to have it sort of, you know, mapped out or anything like that. You can, but it's a starting point that the team can add on, and it also too, it helps you to explain or help them grasp the concept of function analysis and, you know, and verbs and nouns and everything like that. It becomes a teaching tool, but at the same time, it helps you move your team forward. Okay. And the first time I ever heard this, and I will give a shout out to him, was a chap by the name of Scott McClintock. Some of you know him for sure. And I remember in the early 2000s, him making a presentation that talked about function pre-work. And I said, Scott, that's not the way to do things. You can't do that. He says, well, it just gives me a bit of a head start. It took me just, I don't know, about 8 or 9 years for that to sink in. But it's a very effective tool to get you going, because when you're building a function list, the hardest part is starting, right? So I'm sure some of you have experienced that. So the other things too are, and this was the point that Charles, by the way, said, is that you list functions to the point where you can kick your creativity in. And I almost exclusively use graphic function approaches. I find that rather than having sort of a list of functions and then going through and charting them and things of that nature, I graphically do them. Now that list here might show up as just hanging off the bottom here until we move things around. But I find that the graphical approach is the most engaging. It allows you to check and double check your logic as you're going through, you know, your how, why logic. And in fact, this example here that I'm using, this is a mind map process that I use, and I've been using it, 25 years? No, 28 years, something like that. And it's basically, it's function clusters. So you got to really be careful on how you say that. But the whole concept here is that there's really a set of functions that satisfies the user of whatever you're looking at. Then there's some external functions. There's some functions that the external stakeholders you have to satisfy because they have a say in whatever you're looking at. And all of those functions, you know, you could keep going to the right here ad nauseum, but you don't have to. The function cluster itself just sort of connects. And if you want to be more detailed, you can. If you want to stay higher of abstraction, you can stop short of that, okay? But the process here is engagement of your team and to make it go as fast as you can. And the big joke, of course, is that fast diagrams are slow. Well, they're not. You know, if you have a list, you can move these things around without, you know, if you try and do it on Excel or something like that, like we used to do, it's really difficult. But, you know, doing it in here, doing it in Miro, things of that nature, you can really move it around quickly, and you can build consensus in terms of functions without wearing out your team. So what's the outcome of that? Well, you actually typically will see a reduction in function analysis time. And what's the benefit of that? You get more development time. So, so you can see here, this duration here is now shrunk down a little bit. Let's keep going. Okay, rethinking the thinking. Well, brainstorming or the creativity process is, I think, pretty well understood, but also too, very typical of a lot of team leaders. They will use a sequential brainstorming process. And if they're doing it according to SAVE, they're looking at brainstorming function by function. So you have a function, you brainstorm on it, then you move to the next function, you brainstorm on it, and so on. If you're violating the whole concept of the value methodology, you're brainstorming on, ideas for the head house or ideas for the interchange or something like you're brainstorming on the element instead of tying it. And then you say, well, why did I do function analysis if I don't use it in my brainstorming? Typically, we see groups working as one unit. That 80-person group that I was describing, which is a real outlier for me, is pretty big. But one group, you still have an opportunity to see a lot of people hiding in there that don't really participate. And so you're not really getting the benefit out of that. And also too, most of the time, the facilitator is the recorder. And so that's really a speed bump. You can't move forward till the recorders or the facilitators kind of written it out and you carry on.
Hey, David.
Okay. Yes.
Just wanted to remind you that we have about 10 minutes, so we want to leave some room for Q&A.
Yep. Gotcha.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're at number 4 and the other ones are even faster. So concurrent thinking is to do work in multiple functions at the same time. How do you do that? Well, typically what I do is I will get them to do a mind dump. So everybody's been thinking about the ideas or thinking about the project. And so you just say, write down 5 ideas that you've got on this project. Don't worry about function. Don't worry about anything. What are 5 ideas? What does that do? First off, that gets them going. So it sort of pricks the boil of, hey, let's get going, coming up with ideas. And second off, too, it really sets as a starting point for brainstorming. Working in breakout groups with distinct time limits. So a group will look at a function, another group will look at another one, and then you rotate that and the next group has less time. And it's sort of a law of diminishing returns approach. But then you can also use a dump and clump recording. You're seeing a picture of that here where that would have been a function and the yellow team, they would have had the first shot at it. So you can see that they've got the most ideas. And then it becomes harder over time to add additional ideas. So what's the outcome of that? Well, typically you can reduce the length of creativity. What's the benefit? More development time. And so you can see just this gets a little bit squeezed, all the other things as we're building on. Okay. Okay, evaluation processes. You need them to sort out the ideas. And you could have 5 ideas, you could have 500 ideas. But at the end of the day, there are only a certain number that you can develop. In a lot of cases, a lot of team leaders will use a single-step evaluation process. They go through in minutia, detailing, reviewing each idea. Very time-consuming, and in the end of the day, I'm not sure that it really helps you that much. It's a speed bump. Team gets frustrated, disengage. So a way to sort of counter that is to use a 2-stage process. And I use this one. It's a championing and consensus process. So the championing is basically you take the ideas and you give the team enough choices to get 1/3 of the ideas. And then you throw out the other 2/3 of the ideas. So it's like the top of the pyramid or the top of the iceberg or whatever. And what you're doing there is you're premising it on the SMEs having experience to recognize right off the bat, that's an idea that we need to look at. That one isn't. You don't need its extensive analysis at this point. just to get to a short list. So this list here would be about 1/3 of these ideas, or even less, because you may throw some out. And then as you build consensus, then you're doing your detailed list. Consider using function performance attributes. Here's an example of one. And basically, these are sort of criteria that you can use that will differentiate key ideas. And so there's an example from, I think it's a road project. I use a value index. So what it does is, again, it's a graphical solution. It helps people very quickly understand where the best ideas are going to fit in. So this reads relative functional improvement. So more functional improvement, better. Less resources to implement it, better. It's kind of like a ball diamond thing. So home run out here, and are the best ideas, and you work your way in. And so we use those functional attributes as question marks here. Where do we fit on this scale? And then we usually have a pretty good sense of what the resources are. So what's the outcome of this? Well, you're hopefully you're seeing a theme that sequential brainstorming versus concurrent brainstorming. Concurrent brainstorming allows you more development time. More development time, I think better ideas. Okay, planning development, consider working in mini teams. Traditionally, it's been sort of one person works on an idea. If you put it in a team, you get better results because you can take advantage of individual strengths. You want to first get them to discuss or clarify those ideas. And I always get the groups to do their slides first. And why do I do that? Well, it gets their thought processes sorted out. They can see trouble coming on the horizon, or issues with some of the ideas, and we may just walk away from them. And also, too, it allows them to prepare a write-up outline. So rocking the talk, making the ideas come alive. So there's a couple of different ways to organize. One is by function, one's by topic. Do you put critical or controversial issues first or last? It depends on your audience, because a controversial issue is going to take time. And if you get bogged down right at the very beginning, you may never get to the end of your presentation. Should you present every idea? Probably not. There are ideas that are just so self-explanatory you don't need to consume time on it. But the most important thing as you as a team leader is to control that presentation time. I like to put my workshop presentations just before lunch. So say 10 to 12 or 9:30 to 12 or something like that. Because people want to quit at 12. You know, they're hungry. So it's a way to do that. Otherwise, you get these run-on things, and everything breaks down. You don't leave them with a strong finish. Subject matter specialists want to talk a lot, and you don't necessarily need them to talk a lot because it's on the slides and it'll be in the report. And just make sure that the slides are concise. So to recap, we talked about the workshop and how to think about that, prepping the team, you as a subject matter specialist in functions, rethinking how you create efficient choices and plan development, and then finally how your presentation to just make it rock. And oh, I didn't tell you the secret. Okay, so after all those things, you want me to tell you some more. Okay, well, this is it.
Yes.
What works for me, show up energized. Expect the need to adapt as you're going through, because there will be curveballs. Just know that they're going to happen so you don't get frazzled on it. And then most important of all that I like to say is have fun. So closing off, we talked about where I got going in value management and what has set my perspective, understand some of the challenges that I've observed in terms of the way teams operate and the efficiency or lack thereof in a workshop. I told you what my goals were for trying to enhance that, and gave you 8 different ways to consider. And finally, I've summarized that. So with that, I will stop the share and return it back to Mushtaq.